Welcome, everybody, to another fantasy chat. Today, I am extremely excited to bring to you not only the creator of Rage of Dragons and its follow-up Fires of Vengeance, but announce the cover, which I'm assuming, if I've done my job well as in editing, it's up right now. And thank you, Evan Winter, for coming on again to talk with us about Rage of Dragons and now the follow-up Fires of Vengeance. How's that going?
It's going well, and I just want to say thank you to you for having me. You know what? I'm actually, and people say this, but it's very true in my case, I'm a fan of the show. And I watch you all the time, and I feel that you are incredibly insightful, and I love the way that you think about our genre and the way that you talk about it. And so I really appreciate having your voice as part of the SFF community. So thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for letting me be a part of rolling out the cover here, because as you can see, I like it. It looks really, really good. So what was your first impression of seeing this piece brought to you? Was it just, okay, yes, right away? Like, how did you react to it?
They sent it by email, and I opened the email, took a look at the cover, and instantly I just felt blown away. I mean, I love dragons. I love the fact that it is this sort of dragon mask that is in the style of sort of an African carving. My mother's house, my mother and father's house, is filled with wooden carvings that we brought from Africa, from Zambia, where I grew up. And when I grew up in Zambia, we had them all over the place. Like, it's one of the main sort of forms of art that the artists in Zambia do. And Carla Ortiz, the artist for the cover, and Lauren Panapinto really captured a lot of that feel that made me remember and sort of go back to what felt like home for me. Because to see that mask and have it feel so authentic to my experience was a really powerful thing. And plus, it's this dragon with the fire blazing around, and I fell in love with the cover the instant I opened the file. So very, very happy.
And I will say, just as like a fan perspective, thank you for having a consistent cover follow-up, because one of my biggest pet peeves is when covers just have no unity whatsoever. And this definitely falls into, okay, that looks like the sequel to the cover we saw before.
Love it. And so there's a little bit of pressure for 3 and 4 on Carla and Lauren. I'll sit back and let the experts do their work. But I've been blown away each time so far, and it's been a joy to work with them.
So your first book here, Rage of Dragons, it had such a positive response. I mean, I've had, just in my channel alone, so many people pick it up. There's a whole channel about it in my Discord server where people are talking about it, and it's spoilers. So how high was the pressure going in for book 2, and how did you handle it?
Great question. It is a cliche to talk about book 2s and how hard they can be. I definitely did find that it was difficult. Not that the story felt like I wasn't as excited or it wasn't as captivating to me. I really, really like where book 2 goes. Mm-hmm. Like with any book 1, you have to set up a lot of things. You have to build the world. You have to sort of travel with the people and explain the story so that everybody joining you for that journey understands what's going on, why it's going on, and how it's going on. And in book 2, I had the opportunity to just sort of explode everything and really sort of drive toward the ending that I sort of saw in my head from the beginning. So from a writing perspective, from an actual getting into the story perspective, book 2 was a dream. But then, like you said, with all of those external pressures that come with it, you can see all the reviews, you can see the overall reception, which has been, and I'm so grateful, it's been relatively positive. It's been mostly positive. And you want to continue telling the story in a way that lives up to everything that you've done before. So there is that pressure. There is that sort of weird feeling of everything in book 1 was sort of my whole life in fantasy compressed into one story. Right. And I had a lifetime to do it. And now with book 2, I have a year to tell the follow-up. And so that's hard.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And did you was there a hard deadline that you followed and, okay, it's a year and I'll have it out, and you managed to meet it? Or was it, again, the cliche of, I saw that deadline go by? And
there was a hard deadline. And I did sort of see that whiz past a little bit. I tried as hard as I could to hit the deadline, and just could not do it. I mean, I guess that sort of the pressure of getting that second book to where I wanted it to be was difficult, because with book 1, I allowed myself to do draft after draft after draft, and you could step away from the story and come back to it. And then one of the things I really, really like to do is come back to the story and do my very best to experience it as a reader. Mm-hmm. And with the compressed timeline, it was harder to come back and feel like I was viewing it fresh. So right up until the sort of the final edits, I was going in and doing a bit more in terms of just language finessing, storytelling finessing than is typically done at sort of in those phases. Like we just finished one of the last. We think you need a comma here. We think you should remove this comma here, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what you're supposed to do. And I went in and I was like, yeah, and I'm also going to add these 3 paragraphs here, and I've gone in and made a bit more work for the people on the back end, and I feel really bad for that. But again, with Orbit, they've been so supportive, and with my editor Bree, in her emails to me, she said, "This is adding a bit of work. We're going to have to make it happen in terms of hitting the launch date, the new launch date, first of November 10th. We'll do it. The most important thing is that we're telling the best story we can." Mm-hmm. And to get an email like that, to get messages like that from your editor when you're kind of cramming everyone else's sort of deadlines is such a positively reinforcing thing. It's like they're about the story and telling the best story. So
well, I can understand being forgiving on that as well, because you can only release the book once, right? As soon as it's out, it's out. And so I can see, okay, if we're going to change this, let's do it now. You could try and pull a Stephen King and 20 years later add a whole bunch, but that might not necessarily be what you're shooting for. One of the really captivating things for book 1 for me was it is a breakneck pacing. I mean, book 1 is just it's military fantasy. It's compared to Gladiator. It's compared to Song of Ice and Fire. But one of the things that stands out to me is it's just it feels like the gas is on the pedal the whole way through. And for book 2, did you feel like you kind of maintained that momentum, or was it more of a step back and a deep breath? How did you really approach, okay, how am I going to take the story from here?
One of the most important things for me is that if to try and tell a story that I wouldn't be able to put down. Because the world has become so crazy, it's harder for me to pick up a book and really fall into the world and stay in that world. And I hate that about myself. I've become a slower reader. And now I've had this opportunity to get books like pre-release from amazing authors. And they're like, would you like to read this and tell us what you think? And I'm so slow at reading books now because it's hard for me to fall into the world and stay captivated in that, or stay captured in that world. And so it was really important for me to tell a story that wouldn't let me go, that would absolutely not let me go as a reader. And it's not going to be for everybody, but I guess my goal isn't to try and tell the story so that it matches or works for everybody. It's the only person that I can ever know for sure is me. So I'm trying my very best to tell a story in book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4 that would never let me go and would hold me from page to page to page till the very end. And with book 2, it works like that for me. Like there are scenes and moments that feel bigger and more bombastic, for lack of a better word, even in book 1. And some of them, like my ultimate goal as well is to like have moments where I feel like I need to pump my fist when I'm reading the words. Again, for me, I have those moments in book 2. Make me want to cry, that make me feel like I cannot wait to turn the page to see what's happening next. And then all I can hope is that it feels that way for readers too. But I aim to make it so that I can't put it down.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. At hearing that and thinking about the reading experience of book 1, that adds up. And so when you're writing, I'm curious, because I've heard very different accounts from authors here. I mean, you have the author of The Witcher who says, when I write, I don't picture anything. It's just the words come out of me. And then you have people like on the complete other end of the spectrum where they are literally in the world saying the words of dialogue as they write them, like Jim Butcher, I recently heard say. Where would you fall in that spectrum? Are you just no imagination, just the raw words, or are you in the world as much as you can as a creative?
I'm definitely more words than visual. I worked in film before. I think I mentioned that last time we spoke. And it was always a struggle for me to get super visual. I have to work at that part. And the words always came more easily. But I think because of that background, and because I'm just a little bit performative with the writing, I actually kind of almost do a little stage play for myself. Like I'm performing it. Like I'm in the fight scenes, I swing just my hands, no sword, but I just swing my hands and I try and feel the way it feels. And I'm literally reading the dialogue out loud. Like to me, it's like a stage play. And I did the very first thing that was ever produced, I guess you could say, that I did was in high school. I wrote a play. And we performed it, and there's the Sears Ontario Drama Festival, which is one of North America's largest drama festivals. And the play that was produced by my high school went through all the different stages of that competition, and you go and you perform at other schools and all the rest. And I bring it up because I sort of grew up in the theater, and to me, that sort of very visceral experience of trying to feel what a character is feeling, to feel the story, to imagine it all around you and make that world as real as you can. That's how I write. Like I get in there and I I read it out loud, I act it out loud, I perform it because I want to feel what's happening in the story. So I'm not super visual, but I definitely get into it on an emotional and physical level.
Okay. Now, with your background in film, are you thinking like, I want this scene to play out in a way that like Kubrick would have directed it, or is it not quite at that level?
Yeah, no, I think I totally do see film shots, and I do kind of think of the writing. And some people will again, they won't connect to this because maybe they're looking for a different experience in their story. But I do try and tell a story that feels to me to be very cinematic. Again, because that's the kind of story that I would connect to most if I'm reading it, and that kind of viscerality and physicality and sort of that sort of dumping you into that world and trying to make it feel as real as possible. On a sort of an emotional level, and maybe more even than an intellectual level, is sort of what connects me to the work. Mm-hmm. And so very much trying to be cinematic in the way I write, because that's what I would enjoy.
Yeah, it's interesting you choose that word cinematic, because I think that really does come through the way you structure your writing. It feels to me like it's almost building a shot. It feels very in the style, you're taking the time and care to build the scene in that way. I think I said this in the last interview we had here, where this is a book where I think it's like made to be adapted. Are you currently pushing that at all, or is that you can't talk about, no words? I'm gonna try to get that information as much as I can.
That's totally cool. I'll say that. I'll say that I've...
like how I went super roundabout to try and get there. I was like, we can get here. I could ask.
Oh, man. Almost slipped just now. What I'll say is that I do think very much in terms of structuring, even in the outlining stage, and I'm a heavy outliner, I think of the book in terms of episodes and seasons. I mean, it helps me, I think, focus on the idea of pacing and momentum. And one of my goals as well, by breaking up the book the way I do and thinking of it the way I do, is that it allows me to look at each section and almost think of it as an episode and say, is this a filler episode? Because I don't want filler episodes. You know what I mean? I want to always be I want every section to be ideally moving the story forward and acting like a solid arc of television. So that when you watch the whole thing, there's no episode that leaves you going, why did I just watch that? That didn't contribute to where we're going in the story. I mean, that's the goal anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So I do very, very much think about what I'm doing in terms of like a TV episodic kind of thing that's got an overall arc that takes you through. So, you know what, I think that I'm glad that you feel that from it, because that is, again, the attempt that's sort of the goal that I'm after and chasing. And in terms of seeing this in TV or film, that would be a dream come true. And I would, the day I get to announce something like that, I would love to, come back and maybe let you know.
Gotcha. So you're saying you're maybe at Disney Plus shows in the future. No. Did you see writing book 2? Were you more immersed than ever in that sense, or was it, same level? Because I feel like you've been in the world longer now, right? It's got to feel more real in a sense.
Yeah, that's a good question as well. And I think that for me, it felt roughly the same in terms of getting into the world. And the interesting thing for me is that you asked, like, was it easier to get into the world because I already know it? But it wasn't that much easier because we go to different places. And so I kind of had to learn and discover and feel these new places a little bit more as well, and try to understand what they were. So it felt roughly the same. I think that, it felt roughly the same as doing book 1. I think that the main difference is that I have learned a couple lessons in terms of, hopefully, the way that the characters interact with one another and how to really sort of tell what they're doing, explain what they're doing, and how they're interacting a bit more clearly in terms of the words I'm writing down. Because I see all of it in my head, and then my goal is, it's like someone's told me a story, and then my goal is to just sort of transcribe that story. Like I can see it, again, almost like a movie, almost like a story, and I'm trying to put it on the page. And there is that disconnect between the way it feels and the way I see it in my head and what gets out on the page. And again, what I'm always trying to do is make the gap between what's up here and what's on the page get smaller and smaller until I'm actually giving readers exactly what's in my head, because that's the purest version of it. And my skill level still lacks a little bit, so I lose something in translation. And I'm trying to always make that gap smaller.
Okay, interesting. So there's a you're trying to streamline and flesh out the communication between the mental and the written as much as possible. Interesting. So you said we're expanding here, we're growing. It's new places was what you said. Is that a hint that this is becoming more of the wider, true epic side of things, where okay, we had this intense, intimate story, and now we're growing beyond? Is that the teaser for book two?
I think the stakes definitely do get higher, and the issues that that Tao faces do get bigger, and it's still very important to me that we're following his journey, and that was been my goal from the beginning. Even though with a lot of epic fantasy we see many points of view, a big thing for me was to say, well, I'm going to settle into this one person, and some people will hate him and they might not like the book because of it. Some people will love him, and it'll make the book even better. And perhaps the majority of people fall kind of in the middle, but at least you know what you're getting and you know the eyes through which you see this world and this story. It was very important for me to do that because, again, those are the stories that feel the most propulsive for me as a reader, and those tend to be the stories I enjoy the most. The Rage of Dragons and the Burning series was really my attempt to take everything that I had read and learned and loved about fantasy and then twist it just enough so that it would be the perfect story, the perfect world, the perfect telling for me. And that, again, that's sort of that's my North Star. It has been, and I hope to have it be throughout the rest of the series. And unless something disabuses me of this whole theory of that this is how it can work well, ideally, I'd like to maintain that for the rest of whatever writing career I'm able to have, is just to tell the story that I would love the most and always hope that it can connect to enough other people to make it so that I can just keep telling more stories.
Mm. So I saw a post on Reddit recently about the Rage of Dragons. It was a review, and it had a top comment. So I'm going down here. So the top comment was pointing out how they appreciated your writing. You seem to be the kind of author who really thinks through the consequences of certain things in your story. Like, for example, we have a protagonist who's using two swords in an arena, which if someone was bringing a bow and arrow in, that means he dies because you can't use two swords against a bow and arrow, you're done. There's a lot of stories where people will just say, oh, don't think about it. Like, just don't think about the fact that if a guy went up with two swords against a bow and arrow, he would die. So what was your approach? Was that something you intentionally did, or did I just hit something that, oh, you didn't, that wasn't intentional, but it's a happy side effect?
That one in particular was very intentional. Maybe not,
okay.
Not all of them are, I guess, but that one was very intentional. And the world that we exist in, at least in Unzida, right? The wood is not strong enough to be able to allow for archers. Like the wood would break and splinter and shatter. You can't make bows and arrows in that way. And so it just naturally occurs from that fighting with spears and swords is much more practical and makes much more sense. And those kind of fighters have a greater effect. So yeah, why, I do think about those kind of things as seriously as I can, because for me, one of the main things as well, when I'm reading a story or enjoying some sort of fiction, is do the things that happen, do the consequences that occur make sense to me on like a human and level, right? Do I go, yeah, that makes sense, and it's not just people doing it because of plot reasons. It's not just people. That doesn't just happen because whatever. It all makes sense. And if I was in that situation as a reasonable thinking individual, I am likely to react somewhat similarly. I do try and do that. Now I think that sometimes what happens is people think about all sorts of stuff different ways. So they might go, if I was in that situation, that still feels completely impractical to me. There's no way I would take that action or go down that course. But everything in there passes sort of like the smell test for me. Like I go, can I really see this being the outcome or the course that gets taken? And that's important to me because one of my best friends his name's Anthony, and we watched a lot of movies together growing up, and we'd sit in the theaters and afterwards sit in the theater and talk for like an hour once the credits are rolling and everything else. And the main thing that we sort of focused on was we would always talk about, does this make sense? Like, why would they do that? You know what I mean? And so super low consequence actions tend to connect less with me, right? Mm-hmm. So it's always about trying to find an action or a consequence that makes sense in the world so that the internal logic fits. Like that's important for me. And again, different people will say, well, that still doesn't work for me, or I don't get that logic. But everything that's in the books at least passes that test for me.
Mm-hmm. And so you like to follow through the ripple of every decision you make to make sure it doesn't accidentally throw something else off.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So that begs the inevitable question: if you ever, halfway through writing book 1 or 2, did you ever realize, like, damn?
I do mostly in the outline because I outline so heavily that I would almost all of the big ones like that, the big sort of uh-oh moments happen in the outline where I go, oh, that's not working or it doesn't make sense. So then I go back through the outline and I fix it. So that by the time I'm drafting, I've hopefully ironed out almost all of those kind of issues. And again, I think that helps me, and I really am a big proponent of outlining, but I know it doesn't work for everybody. And all I think I'm doing when I'm outlining is just shifting the nature of the work. Like if someone is not an outliner, they write and then they probably do more work on the back end. I just do more work on the front end. We're all doing the same thing. It's just that I push it on the front end. And again, it's partially a function of who I am and how I like to work. I hate redoing things. Completely despise having to redo stuff. So my way around that is do all the work up front. And that way there's less for me to have to redo once the draft is done, in theory anyway.
That makes sense. See, I'm the complete opposite. I just meander through my text, and then I just continue on from there. But no, I probably should shift to outlining more, because there have been instances where I've just hit something and it's like, okay, let's rewrite the last 10 pages and figure it out.
But I guess, again, though, the advantage is maybe because I have the outline, I'm always looking at notes, which is sort of that story in my head that I've already discovered and found. I'm then trying to tell the story almost secondhand in a way. Like if the story's already been told, I'm retelling it. The advantage I think somebody who does an outline in that same way might have is that you're telling the story live. And so there's maybe a little bit more of, I worry sometimes that you can feel not the strings that you can feel the author's hand, because I'm telling the story for the second time. It's already been told to me, I'm telling it again. The way I think you work maybe is that you're just telling the story one time through. And so you don't feel the author as much, and so I have to go back in subsequent passes and try and say, well, are you feeling me telling the story too much as opposed to just living the story? And so, yeah, so I think that's the advantage of the way that you do it, is that it feels more instant, more like in the moment sometimes.
Speaking of, is there a pre-order link yet, or is that still not available?
That's a good question. There is a pre-order link for book 2. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I'll be sure to have that right down there for everyone who wants to check that out. Okay. So it's coming up. It's coming in November. We aren't quite sure where the tour is going to be, happening or not because of events, but you mentally, kind of as this is coming up, I'm curious about how you kind of sit with it. 'Cause I can't, is there a whole lot of oh, I want to go back and rewrite this, but I can't, it's too late? Or is it, nah, I'm happy, it's settled, let's get it out there?
It's hard for me to let go. But the things that I am playing with or would play with at this point are language smoothing, are the moments that I'm not changing the story, because again, the story, I've seen it in my head for a year now. The story is what it is. It's just me trying to play with that translation again from head to paper. So, I'm happy to have it go out into the world the way it is, because it's ready. But I could play with it for forever, because I could always go in and adjust the way the sentence flows or that moment happens. But the moments in the sentences are all they're all still going to be what they are. Someone reading what I would do if I had another year versus what I have now might not even really notice the difference. I would have to hope, because I spent a year, if I was to spend that extra year, I would hope they would feel like, oh, this is a bit more refined, but the story would be the same. So
it would more just be an adjustment of prose, it seems like, from what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. So, I end these interviews with this question: what are you currently reading right now, and what is something you've recently read that you've absolutely loved?
Oh, that's a tough one, because I'm kind of in a bit of a reading slump. Let's see. I am finishing up I'm going to mispronounce this, and I feel so bad. I'm finishing up The Sword of Kaigen.
Oh yeah.
Yes, right now. You've read that, right? Have you?
Yeah, Sword of Kaigen is awesome.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm finishing up that right now, and very much enjoying the journey so far, and looking forward to. Unfortunately, I've heard there's. Should I even say this? I've heard there's kind of like a little. There's a twist or something happens that's a big thing. I mean, most books have something big happen toward the end, but I at least have heard that. Maybe you can edit this out if we shouldn't say that much. I don't know. It's coming, but looking forward to finding out what it is.
Very cool. And so as a fan, you got to give me this question. I'm not coming as an interviewer. I'm coming as a fan. Are you starting book 3 at all, or is it just a step back and breathe moment? How's book 3 looking?
Book 3 is looking pretty good. I'm very excited about, again, a lot of the big moments in book 3. It's interesting because the outlines for book 1 and book 2 were the most solid going in, and book 3 has been the most amorphous of all of them. Like I kind of know the ending to the point where I even have some of the ending lines already written of book 4. I mean, the very end of the series. And book 1 and 2, I very much understood. And book 3, I know where book 3 ends, and I know where book 3 begins, and I have all the major moments in there because I know what the story is that I'm trying to tell. But it is still the most amorphous of the 4. So it feels interesting to be sort of diving into the world and tackling book 3, especially when book 2's not yet out, and then people are gonna start talking about book 2, and then I'll be done book 3 by that point, and it's just it's a strange thing, publishing, and the whole lag. It's very odd.
I imagine, and I'm so envious of your scaffolding that you have. You can build it up, and then you just go from there. That sounds so much less stressful. I'm jealous. All right, well, sorry.
I'm just quickly going to ask, when you go, you just literally just jump in and just go?
I have a bullet point list of things I kind of like know I want to hit on eventually, and then I just am like, all right, let's see how we get there, and I just kind of go through the path, and half the bullet points end up deleted or totally changed. It's very just off the top of the dome, and I'm sure it'll come across messy as a result.
No worries. That's like that jazz musician type stuff. Okay, I'm very impressed and also envious of that ability. Wow.
Let's see how it pans out before we say that we're jealous or envious. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing the cover with us here. I will, of course, have links to follow Evan on Twitter, pre-order the book, just a giant link to check out the image because it's gorgeous. You guys want to have it as your backgrounds because I'm keeping that. It looks damn good. And thank you so much, Evan, for coming by.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and wishing you all the best, and safe times and healthy times to you and your family. Thank you.